Live from Seattle, it's the Dick Staub Show, home of warm hearts, active minds, and hungry souls. And now, here's the expander of your universe, Dick Staub.
Welcome, everybody. This is Dick Staub, your host, and I want to thank you for joining me for what is an encore presentation of the Dick Staub Show. The late Rich Mullins spent some time with me in Chicago not long before he died. Now sit back and enjoy an encore presentation of our interview with Rich Mullins. He's always been one to march to the beat of a different drummer, which is one of the reasons that I like him already. After finishing a BA in music education, he headed off to teach on a Navajo Indian reservation, which is kind of not a non-traditional path. Reunion has just released Rich Mullins' collection Songs, and prior to that, Brother's Keeper contains some of his most original and fresh material yet. Welcome, Rich Mullins. It's nice to have you with us.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Wasn't that a huge introduction?
That was
a mere mortal?
I'm so impressed.
I know, I stumbled over it anyway. But I did, work it out very carefully. Let's start with the most recent news first. What is Canticle of the Plains?
Well, let's see. It's kind of a long story. Are you ready?
We're ready.
Okay. It started when I was in a senior in high school in 1974, and I saw a movie by Franco Zeffirelli called Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because the next summer I was camping out in the Ozarks, and I was hanging out with a bunch of people I'd met, and there was this guy, and we started talking about movies, and I said, that I had seen Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon 3 times, and he said, don't go back and see it again. I had a friend who was a banker, and he saw it 4 times, disappeared, and the guy had gotten a letter from him about a couple months later, and he had gone to, he was living in a Franciscan mission somewhere over in Europe. And so, I never did that. So, but, just trying to see what Christianity looks like, not from my real narrow experience, my own narrow view of it. I've become really interested in the whole monastic sort of experience and all that. And Beaker, a guy who I've co-written with for about 10 years, and we're reading about that and kind of going, man, that sounds like it would be a great time. So the problem was, we don't even have the guts to be Catholic, let alone be, involved in a religious order. So we sort of started a mock order. It was a little bit of a joke. But the idea was to try to follow that kind of thinking. The 3 traditional monastic vows are the vow of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And we're kind of going, man, one of the problems we have is we're sort of out here just making Christianity up as we go along. We don't have any kind of orthodoxy. We don't have anything that, we take the Bible verses that we especially like and we enjoy them, and the Bible verses we don't like, we say that it was just, Paul was hung up about this, or
culturally context, or
right. And so we decided to take church membership more seriously and try to think of ways to be integrated more into the body of Christ. And then we decided, neither one of us had a date for several years at the time, so we decided if we're going to be celibate, we may as well make a religious big deal out of it. And poverty has always been an easy nut for me to tie because I have trouble holding on to money. So we decided one of the great things, it's always bugged me all this stuff about tithing, because I kind of go, man, there's not a mention of it in New Testament except in somewhat negative terms. And why is it, if money is the root of all evil, why do we think that we're doing God a favor by giving him 10% of it? Wouldn't we do ourselves more of a favor if we gave him 90% and only kept 10% of this evil root? And so we tried to figure out, what do most people live on in the United States? And let's live there or under. And then the rest of the money would go to, projects that we're interested in, or, organizations, that kind of thing. So it's been challenging.
Now, how did this work itself into Canticle of the Plains?
Oh, that's right. Well,
and what is the Canticle?
That's right. That's right. That's all background material. Well, since we weren't going to be Franciscans, but we really liked St. Francis of Assisi, we decided to reinvent him as St. Frank of Wichita.
Good.
And so we invented this whole character, and we were kind of going, let's just make up a guy. I mean, let's see what if you took those elements of Francis' life that made him a real that made him the sort of character who probably single-handedly caused the Renaissance.
Yeah.
What would he look like if he had lived in 19th century America?
19th or 20th century?
in the 1800s.
Okay.
I have a real problem with that too.
Yeah, well, it's the numbers thing. It's the money thing is numbers too.
Yeah. So, we thought, and we figured he'd be, he'd live on the frontier. He'd live on the edge.
Yeah.
Probably be more interested in a just dealing with Native Americans than, like, say, the government.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, who wouldn't be? And et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Only we had a real problem figuring out what's he like, what does he look like, what does he sound like, how does he move. Then I went back to Friends University to finish up my music ed degree, and I met Mitch McVicker,
mm-hmm.
and I went back and I said, man, I just met Frank.
Okay.
So Mitch has joined us now, but at the time I didn't even know he was a musician. I just knew that he was he had a quality about him that seemed very, very much like what Frank would be like, and we studied him, and we built the character, of Frank of Wichita
on Mitch.
On Mitch.
This guy's sitting right over here.
Yeah. So, yeah, doesn't he look saintly?
So this is tell me about the production.
We wrote 10 feature songs.
Yeah.
Just because we're pop Christian artists, and you always put 10 songs on an album.
The formula.
Yeah. Formulas are nice, though.
Yeah, they give some bookends, some definition.
Right.
Yeah.
And you get a formula down, and then you can fill in the blanks. And it starts with his conversion, which happens at the end of the Civil War.
Cool.
And then we put a whole lot more metaphorical stuff in it. And he takes off on a journey to Denabakea, which is where the Navajos are from.
Mm-hmm.
And they're searching for this place that they think is imaginary. And then in the end, they don't even get there, but they realize they've been there all along. So it's
a little Pilgrim's Progress kind of thing.
Yeah, it's kind of foofy, I guess. I don't know. I have no idea.
Now, you've already talked a bit about what it says about your own spiritual sojourn.
Uh-huh.
You're trying to get to some first things, some basic things, some important things.
Right.
Where did the thing about the Navajos come from in your life?
Because I live with them.
But I mean, where did that come from in the first place? Why did you decide to do that?
Well, because I wanted to go to Asia, but it was so far away. And I spent a summer there, and the thing that I enjoyed about being in Asia was that I noticed, and this is of course a real oversimplification of what really happened. Sorry, I talk with my hands. But what I basically noticed was that the Asian Christians had underlined all the wrong parts of the Bible.
Like persecution and that stuff?
Well, like instead of underlining the part about you must be born again, which Jesus said one time to one guy who was specifically hung up on being a Pharisee.
Right.
They underlined the part that said, sell all that you have, give to the poor and follow me.
Yeah.
And I was going, and then all the good Christian American people were trying to straighten them out and say, no, you're supposed to have some kind of ecstatic experience and build your faith on that experience. And they were saying, no, it's not about experience, it's about obedience. And there was this thing going on, and I started going, I don't know which side is right or if either side is right or if the truth is actually somewhere beyond all that. But the thing that happened for me was I began to, being there, like one of the things I noticed in Asia was that in Thailand, brides wore red.
Right.
And I understand they do in China, too.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, red to us seems like, the color of adultery. But to them, it's the color of fertility. Well, it's interesting to me that in China, families are only allowed to have one child now, I understand.
Mm-hmm.
But they still wear red at their weddings, which is very similar to in America, how brides still wear white here, although, a significant number of them aren't necessarily pure. So if I stand, let me stand on the promise that you will pull me through. And if I can't, let me fall on the grace that first brought me to you.
I think you're on a really exciting, and most people would agree, alternative for our culture, spiritual journey. One of the places where I feel really called right now is, because I've been talking a lot with Brendan Manning, who's a huge hero of mine. It's amazing,
great guy,
to get to actually meet a hero.
Yeah.
But he's like hammering me, saying, your identity has to come from your understanding that you are beloved by God.
Mm-hmm.
And if your self-concept is based on what other people think of you, or what other people think of your work, or what you think of your work, or the fact that that you may see yourself as being intelligent or talented or whatever, or you may see yourself as being addicted and
unfaithful, and if your identity is locked into your pluses and minuses, as opposed to locked into the reality of the love of God, you're going to have trouble all your life. Of course, I think you have trouble all your life anyway. I don't think,
but you might as well get it right.
Yeah, that's like,
you're going to go through it.
Yeah, I guess me and Beaker were talking about this one time, because we've been best friends now for about 10 years, and I think I'm closer to him than, if we were any closer, people would be, suggesting therapy, but we were talking about, man, why is it that we can be this good of friends and we're still both lonely? And what we've realized, if I talk to all my married friends, what you begin to realize is companionship isn't a cure for loneliness. The loneliness is just part of being human. And companionship is merely its own reward. It's just what it is. You have a friend. Doesn't mean that they don't make you more physically fit. They don't make you, richer. What
are you seeing in Christian culture today, in the subculture, that concerns you, that makes you step back and say, this doesn't seem right?
I think my biggest concern is that we have more faith in our understanding of Jesus than we do in Jesus. Does that make sense?
Talk about it.
I think that the reason why God said, first, don't have any other gods before me, and then he said, don't make graven images, is because as humans, we always have a tendency, because we're flesh and blood, and part of us, what we see is what we take into us. Does that make sense? And so I think we all have that tendency to create an image of God. A lot of times our image of God is a projection of ourselves. So the reason, I think the reason why a lot of us see God as being judging and keeping score and that sort of thing is because that's what we do. And so the God that we worship is not the God who what is the word? Who revealed himself in the person of Jesus, but the God that, we put this face of the Breck Lady Jesus that we see in church all the time, we put that face on our character and we worship it. And we wind up in trouble. I think G.K. Chesterton says that, my love. He was talking about how people think that logic will keep us sane, and he says actually the opposite is true. Logic drives us crazy. And then he said this thing that I love. He said, a poet is happy to get his head into the heavens. A mathematician wants to get the heavens into his head, and it is his head that splits. And Mitch and I were just talking on the way up. If you think you've got it, if you think you get it, you haven't got it. That God is always going to be bigger than what we imagine him to be. God is always going to be bigger than what we understand him to be. And the difficulty I have with my own faith and the faith of a lot of people around me is that, if you're a Calvinist, then you assume Calvinism is right. And I kind of go, Calvinism has good points and has,
5 of them.
At least, yeah. But it's not the whole truth. And, Arminianism the same way.
But, part of that is that American Christians are really uncomfortable with ambiguity. We want to have everything in a formula, in 3 steps, 5, we want a formula. And if God is really infinite,
yes,
and immeasurable, then you can't do that with God. And the minute you start doing that with God, you've left something out. So when we come up with these kind of airtight, this is one of the things that I love. When I went to seminary, I decided that I could never be a systematic theologian, because systematic theologians want to take everything and make it fit.
Right.
And then I started seeing that somebody that wanted to study this chapter and this chapter and this chapter and see the points where they fit, and then these parts left over, say, well, that's from God too. I don't know what to do with it, but that is from God too. I started realizing that it doesn't all fit, because God won't fit in the Word. What we have in the Bible is a revelation of God, but it's not all of God.
Right. It's as much of God as he wanted us to know.
Exactly.
And I kind of go, this is exactly like my dad. There were things about my dad I didn't know when I was 5. I knew that he would provide for me. I knew that he would... I knew that as long as I lived in his house, I had to go by his rules. There were things that he let me know, but I didn't know that my dad had done this when he was a kid or done that when he was a kid. I didn't know that there were dreams that he had that he didn't tell me about, because as a 5-year-old, I couldn't have understood him. I couldn't have appreciated him.
Now, you were raised in a Christian home.
Yes.
And in a church environment, but you're a very independent thinker. How did that happen?
I think the church really nurtured independence. I mean, independent thinking. I think my mom was Quaker, and my dad couldn't stand Quakers because he just doesn't get along with pacifists. And
a pacifist and a war maker. What a great combination.
Yeah, which explains why I'm schizophrenic. But
the peaceful warrior.
My dad, when he became a Christian, we started going to the Christian church because the handy thing about being Quaker is you can go anywhere you want. I mean, it has more to do with it's more of a discipline than a set of doctrines. But in all of them, we were always encouraged. And this is where I don't understand why people are in favor of multiculturalism and independent thinking, those kinds of things. Always want to attack the church because I kind of go, man, when I was a kid, we were always encouraged to express our faith and to find ways to express it, and we were never stifled in that. So if I stand, let me stand on the promise that you will bore me through.
Today we're bringing you a rebroadcast of our Rich Mullins interview. I don't know if you've ever heard this before. This is called How to Grow Up Big and Strong.
Yeah. Mark Hurd wrote this song.
Is that right?
And I loved it so much, I've always wanted to record it. I'm not sure I did a good job, but...
No, it's great. It is great. Rich Mullins is with us. We were just talking about kind of observing what's happening in Christian culture, and let's look at broader culture. There was a guy named E.R. Dodds that wrote a book that was titled Pagan and Christians in an Age of Anxiety. And he was talking about the first century as an age of anxiety. And I love that title because I think it fits today, too. People are anxious today. But when you look at culture today, broader culture, not the Christian subculture, but at the broader culture, and let's focus it on American culture. What are some of the things that you see in American culture today that concern you, and particularly, Andy, that you feel the gospel really does address? So there's this disconnect between who we are and what we're trying to say to this culture and where this culture is and what they need.
Well, the big word for me is cynicism. It just seems like people have despaired of a lot. And that there are two reactions to that. One is to, basically I feel like the Enlightenment has played itself out, and it's done all the damage it can possibly do. I mean, I don't know how much more damage the idea of that logic is kind of supreme is going to do. But I think we've got to the bottom of logic, and it doesn't really cover the material, and so people have either they either escape it by becoming increasingly sensual, so they're more, in the church, which is what I'm more familiar with. I mean, you look at all these movements where there's a lot of emotional ecstaticism, and you look at the pro-life movement, and you kind of go, man, this is all about creating a safe little environment for you and your wife and your gloriously perfect children. You look at there's a large return of people to a more liturgical, going back to liturgical stuff. And when I talk to a lot of people who are involved in that, it's purely the sensual drive. It has everything in the world to do with the good feeling they get when they sit through a good liturgy. And you kind of go, man, there's great things about a good liturgy. There's great things about a solid family. There's great things about having an emotional, experiencing your faith emotionally and all that. But all these things are kind of a way of saying it doesn't really make sense, so how can I feel it? Mm-hmm. And then then you see the rise of cults, and you kind of go, I think people are just kind of, we've become so doubtful that we're kind of going, man, how do we, life is full of uncertainty, which it is. How do we get around that?
Mm-hmm. That is a great point. Do you think the Christian faith is rational?
Well,
I mean, what place does reason play in a Christian's life? In a kind of a postmodernist, or as you say, the Enlightenment has kind of burned itself out. It really is that God can't be experienced either just through your mind or through your heart, isn't it? I mean, it's that God really wants all of us, body, mind, and spirit. So there is a place for reason, but it has limitations.
maker of heaven and maker of earth. And in Jesus Christ, his only begotten Son, our Lord. He was conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate. He was crucified and dead and buried. And I believe what I believe is what makes me what I am. I did not make it, no, it is making me. It is the very truth of God, not the invention of any man.
Which of your songs still speak to you? Or do you ever go back?
Ooh, that'd be a hard one, because that's...
kind of a case-by-case, day-by-day?
Kind of a case-by-case.
Well, I'll tell you why I asked the question. I'm probably not a typical talk show host, because I basically kind of have a rule that I'm not going to talk about something I don't want to talk about.
Uh-huh.
So if I was you, if I didn't feel like singing Awesome God for the 3 billionth time, I probably wouldn't want to do it. But the audience wants that.
Right.
And so you're stuck in that thing as a talk show host. Everybody else wants to talk about this. But that's not what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about this. Do you know what I mean?
That's why I'm careful about writing songs, because you go, I'm going to be performing this for several years. I better like it. Which is why I don't understand why, people will pretend to be humble about their work. They'll say, oh, it's not really a very good song. And my question is, and then why did you bother to write it? Writing is a lot of work. I'm just not going to do something that I don't think is good.
Yeah.
And I happen to like my songs.
Yeah, I like your songs, too.
I don't think that's conceited. I just think it's honest. I mean, it is too much trouble if you don't like it.
Sometimes my life just don't make sense at all.
When you think about your own gift and calling as a musician, I like to ask musicians this, and I asked Toby McKeon this from DC Talk, and he says, well, I'm a musical missionary, and Michael Card said I'm a teacher and exhorter. And just last week I asked Steve Green, and he just blurts out, I'm a revivalist. and I says, where did you come up with that? And he said, I don't know. I've never thought about it before. That's just the first word that came to my head. When you think about what your kind of spiritual calling is as an artist, does it define itself in some word that would fit, exhorter, teacher?
Clown.
Yeah, probably. Court jester. Could be a spiritual gift. Well, Keith Green used to say he was the elbow in the body of Christ, because he always liked to be going like that to people.
Right.
I mean, when you are, as an artist, thinking of yourself also in terms of having some sort of impact on people, who is it that you primarily want to speak to?
Myself.
Really?
Yeah, I've never written a song for anybody else, I don't think, except a couple times when I thought I was in love.
And then you could write about other... So your songs are basically things that you're writing about yourself and what you're learning yourself. And this is back to what Brennan Manning said, if nobody else likes it, that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, because, that's the great gift that I think my folks gave me was... my dad was, while he was an elder in the church, he was also a very human man. Mm-hmm. And his thing was, you may not like me, but this is who I am. And you can take it or leave it. If you don't like it, you can go live with your Uncle Dick or something. And but the thing that I most respected about my dad was that he was an excruciatingly honest person. And what I found when he finally died, boy, everybody felt the same way about him. I mean, it was a very cool thing. There was a friend of mine. Or not a whole lot of a friend, actually. He kind of came on the scene after I had left home, but he was youth pastoring in a church, and he was a homosexual, and he finally really came to a crisis about this. He was going, "Gosh, I feel like I'm a phony," because I go to church and I tell kids all this stuff, and then he had at the time was seriously considering striking up a monogamous sort of relationship. I'm not sure if you can call that a marriage or if you shouldn't call it. I don't know what to call it. But anyway, of all the people in the world, he went to my dad, who was My dad was this hillbilly, kind of redneck guy, and he said, you know, what should I do? And my dad said, you need to decide what's most important to you and do it. You can't do everything. And you know what the Bible teaches, and decide if you can live with the Bible or if you can live without it. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was kind of... first of all, I didn't find out about that till my dad's funeral. And
You never heard that story?
No. I was in total shock when he told me that, because I always just thought my dad was this macho, redneck, kind of American, wholesome kind of guy. I thought, man, you know, I had friends that were homosexuals. I would never tell my dad, you know, because I thought he'd freak out. And that was the kind of person he was. And I think that the wonderful thing about my dad was he got carbon. My dad was, like I said, very kind of a hard man, kind of spoke his mind, that kind of thing. And he got carbon monoxide poisoning at his work and almost died. And came back from that experience and realized that there was some real reconciliation needed between him and some of his children. And he went to one of my sisters who was especially somewhat estranged and really began to work on that relationship. Something that was really amazing to see my dad do. A year later, he had a stroke. He recuperated from the stroke and went back and began to work on some other relationships where there had been problems. A year later, he was stung by a bee and had an allergic reaction, ended up in the hospital, came out of that. In the course of those 3 years, I watched God take a guy who had been a faithful Christian but a very hard, crusty kind of Christian, and I watched God systematically take him apart. And the wonderful thing was my dad was no less himself, but he was more himself because of what God did. And it deeply, deeply affected me, because what I began to realize is, you know, God doesn't give up on us, does he? That he will go to any extremes to help us become the person that he created us to be.